Picture the final seconds of a classic gangster movie. Sirens wailing, bullets flying, the outlaw's car riddled with holes. Then a hero or villain slumps dead behind the wheel. For years, that's how people imagined the end of Babyface Nelson. Dead in a blaze of gunfire, collapsing instantly in a pool of cinematic blood. But the facts are much grimmer. After the Barrington shootout, Nelson was not killed outright. He survived, not for minutes, but for hours. Long enough to feel everything. Long enough for hope to fade and reality to close in. One wound, one breath, one brutal minute at a time. This isn't just a legend picked over in gangster books. The reports are clear, and the mortuary records back them up. Nelson clung to life for several hours after his final gun battle. Newspapers at the time noted his drawn-out decline. The official autopsy did not just count bullet holes. It confirmed ongoing signs of life, visible injuries, and the slow, methodical collapse of his body. By the time authorities laid hands on him, Nelson had endured a marathon of pain that's rarely acknowledged in the myth-making. This is the ordeal, not the legend. Maybe you came in picturing Babyface Nelson's end as a clean, quick fade to black. That's the Hollywood script. One bad guy, one big shootout, one tidy corpse. But the real postscript is far messier and much more human. Instead of a sudden death, we're looking at a prolonged, hour-by-hour ordeal, a body fighting, failing, and finally surrendering. Not in a blaze, but in agony. This wasn't a quick, glorious exit. It was the slow, undeniable breakdown of flesh and spirit, the reality most stories leave out. The bare, physical facts are hard to ignore. At Barrington, Nelson was struck by at least 17 bullets. The wounds weren't just superficial. He took hits to the legs, torso, and abdomen, some tearing through muscle, others smashing bone. Medical records and police reports list gunshot entries along his thighs, his back, and his stomach. Blood loss was severe. Some bullets passed clean through, others lodged deep. Every breath, every movement would have been a new trial. This was not a man who died with the pull of a trigger. This was a body forced to endure and fail in public documented detail. But here's what's truly hard to imagine. Nelson, after being riddled with bullets, 17 wounds in total, with shots tearing into his stomach, legs, and arms, did not simply collapse and die on that roadside. Instead, he somehow stayed conscious. Incredibly, he remained alive and, by all period accounts, alert for hours following the shootout. The medical evidence is blunt. These weren't nicks or grazes. Bullets punched through his abdomen, shattered bone, lacerated muscle. Blood pooled beneath him, yet Nelson's body clung to life. Even as his clothes darkened with blood and pain must have pulsed with every heartbeat, he was not finished. The myth of instant outlaw death skips the brutal truth. For Nelson, the final act was a prolonged test of how much agony a body could withstand before giving up. Immediately after the last shots, Nelson didn't wait to be found. He staggered to the getaway car, bleeding heavily, face twisted in pain, but still issuing orders. Helen Gillis, his wife, and an accomplice forced him into the front seat. He slumped behind the wheel, clutching at his wounds, yet he tried to drive. Witnesses later testified to seeing him at the wheel, grimacing, jaw clenched, barking clipped commands through gritted teeth. The escape was messy, desperate, hardly the stuff of heroic legend. At one point, he nearly lost consciousness. threatening to collapse on the pedals. But even then, Nelson insisted on pressing forward. The priority was not surrender, but distance. Every jolt of the car, every pothole and sudden break sent fresh agony through his torn body. Each passing minute was a contest between willpower and the creeping cold of shock. As the car bumped down the road, the physical toll became unmistakable. Blood didn't just ooze from his wounds, it poured, soaking the car seat beneath him. The upholstery beneath Nelson quickly turned slick, stained deep red, while his clothing grew sticky, heavy, and cold. This was not the slow seep of a paper cut. This was a catastrophic leak, arterial, unstoppable, leaving a trail on every surface he touched. Soon the signs of shock began to appear, his skin blanched, lips losing their color, his breath coming in short, frantic bursts. Period accounts noted that by the time they reached even the first hiding place, Nelson was already shivering, locked in a cycle of pain, blood loss, and confusion. His grip on the wheel faltered, hands trembling uncontrollably as his body tried and failed to compensate for the blood draining away. In those brutal minutes and hours, Helen Gillis did what she could. There was no real medicine, no hope of a hospital. Instead, Helen rummaged through whatever they had, scarves, rags, torn strips of shirt. She pressed makeshift bandages against gushing wounds, wrapped his torso and legs, and tried to slow the bleeding with pressure and desperate improvisation. She covered him with coats, tried to keep his body from shaking apart with cold and shock. Nelson, barely coherent, gasped for air, his body racked with shivers, sweat pooling at his hairline despite the freezing air. He groaned and muttered, sometimes cursing, sometimes pleading. Helen's hands, already streaked with blood, worked feverishly to comfort him, holding his head, dabbing his brow, whispering reassurance through chattering teeth. It was all she could do. The car became a rolling, frantic sick room, two people trapped together in a world of pain, blood, and fading hope, with every mile marking one more minute of Nelson's losing battle against his injuries. Medically speaking, this is the territory of shock. Based on autopsy descriptions and the severity of Nelson's wounds, we can cautiously reconstruct what he went through. His skin would have turned pale and clammy, the blood loss robbing his cheeks of color. Shivering set in, not just from cold, but from his nervous system trying, futilely, to fight back against collapse. His breathing grew shallow and quick, mouth dry, lips blue. As the car rolled on, he drifted in and out, sometimes speaking in a confused slur, unable to track who or what was around him. Even when Helen pressed her hands to his wounds, trying to keep him tethered, his pupils might have seemed distant, almost unseeing, classic signs of a body in shock, running on the last dregs of oxygen and adrenaline. The ordeal was not mercifully quick. Nelson's final hours were a jagged line of agony, not a cinematic fade-out. There were stretches when he was lucid enough to groan orders or curse the pain, then sudden plunges into half-consciousness, his words turning to nonsense or trailing off into wet, rattling breaths. At times, he clawed at his clothes or the car seat in a useless search for comfort, only to sink back. Spent, the pain came in waves, sharp shocks from every movement, then long, dull aches as blood seeped from his torso and limbs. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the world outside the car reduced to the dim, freezing air, the smell of iron and sweat, the persistent wet thump of his own pulse fading in his ears. There was no relief, no mythic outlaw bravado, just the endless, humiliating struggle to keep breathing. For Helen Gillis, this was both nightmare and duty. It is likely, judging by the circumstances and known accounts, that she cycled between horror and a desperate kind of stoicism. She had to keep functioning, pressing rags into wounds, wiping blood from Nelson's lips, whispering encouragement she hardly believed herself. Her face may have been streaked with tears one moment, then blank and mechanical the next, as she did what needed to be done. She was terrified. She must have known how little time he had left, but there was no luxury for panic. Even as she felt helpless, she kept moving, searching for new ways to keep him alive, or at least to keep him from dying alone. As the hours passed, Nelson's condition only worsened. He slipped further into semi-consciousness, sometimes jerking awake with a gasp, sometimes lapsing into a heavy, almost peaceful stillness before the pain dragged him back. The cold car grew colder, his limbs turning numb and stiff, fingers and toes losing all sensation as circulation failed. His voice became a hoarse whisper, then faded entirely. By the end, his pain was likely all-consuming, an animal thing, at the edge of his awareness, punctuated by shivers and bouts of delirium. His body shutting down piece by piece as Helen watched, powerless to do anything except hold his hand and wait for the inevitable. In the final stretch, Nelson's body, already battered past anything a healthy person could endure, starts to fail entirely. This wasn't a sudden tidy moment, it was a slow, medical inevitability. His breathing grows ragged, each inhale more shallow and uncertain than the last. His skin, already pale, fades toward a grayish, ashen tone. The flesh around his wounds loses warmth. His lips and fingers turn bluish, starved for blood. At this stage, even the best care in the world wouldn't do much. Those faint, rattling breaths mark a last, flickering resistance. But the body is out of reserves. According to period reports, his final words, if any, are barely more than a whisper, too weak to be heard, lost in the cold air of the car. For all the violence and noise that led here, the end is almost silent. Death, when it finally arrives, brings no cinematic punctuation, no last defiant line, no outlaw bravado. It's simply what happens when the organs can't keep up, when blood loss and shock do what bullets started. Helen and Chase, left with a corpse that's rapidly cooling and still leaking blood from the makeshift wrappings, have no choice but to face the grim logistics. They wrap Nelson's body in whatever they have, coats, maybe a blanket, anything to keep the blood off the car seats and themselves. There's no ritual or ceremony, just exhaustion and the practical need to get clear of the body. Together, they drag him from the car, muscles burning from fear and adrenaline, and abandon the corpse in a roadside ditch. No one speaks. There's nothing left to say. The most hunted man in America ends up dumped anonymously, blood pooling behind him on cold dirt. His last ride finished not in a blaze, but in a grim, exhausted silence. When authorities and the public finally encounter Nelson again, all that's left is physical ruin. There's no legend in the ditch, just a body riddled with wounds and stained by hours of leaking blood. According to direct reports, the police see not the infamous baby-faced Nelson of headlines, but a shattered corpse, cold, stiff, and obviously dead long before they arrive. The hurried removal is mechanical, men with jobs to do, rolling what's left onto a stretcher, keeping their hands clear of the sticky, congealed blood. The body is just another problem to be solved. All the myth, The stories of superhuman toughness or unstoppable evil dissolve when faced with this brutal reality. Nelson was human, and he died like anyone else who loses too much blood in the cold. It's hard not to feel the gap between legend and reality. The end of Babyface Nelson wasn't a final shootout with last words echoing over gunfire. It was hours of slow defeat, of pain and cold and everything shutting down, ending in a ditch with no one left to hear him. The outlaw myth collapses under the weight of what actually happens to the body. In the end, the headline fades, and what stays is the image of a man dying slowly, then being discarded. His story finished not with glory, but with the anonymous, grinding defeat of simple biology and time. So next time you hear the myth of the gangster's last stand, ask yourself what the real story costs, not in headlines, but in flesh and hours and agony. The legend of Babyface Nelson is easy to remember. The truth, cold, painful, anonymous, is much harder to look at, but it's what's left when the gun smoke clears.